Hello, thank you everyone. Thank you for the previous speaker. It's quite hard to be after that, so I'll try to make use of the time. So what I would like to talk to you today is a much broader topic that was been seen before, and really three main elements that for me are converging into today's world, and blockchain is part of that. But there are some macro trends that are making that technology more relevant than before. So there are three main things that I would like to talk to you about. A little bit about trust and how trust is important and an important element of this conversation. Why I think blockchain is a computing platform and what a computing platform is and how this is impact the way technology will be shaping the world. And then a move from what we believe is the World Wide Web through what we call the World Wide Ledger. So if you think about trust, trust is something that is very evident to everyone in this room, but at the same time will have a different definition for every person in this single room. Trust is the fabric of our society, is what makes business work, is what makes government works, is what makes personal relationship work. And yet, trust is not something that is fixed. It's not a definition that is consistent over time. Trust has changed as society has changed, as technology has enabled new different means. As it was touched upon earlier, business went from community-based businesses, community-based society to globalized transactions and a globalized world. And this technology has been a major part of that transition. New technology emerged that enable new type of exchanges that require new forms of trust. And so when you think about the recent years, some of the major institutions that have been the key of trust in this society has been challenged by multiple things. The financial crisis has been quoted multiple times today, but also other type of trust have been challenged. If you think about consumer rising expectations around how companies provide services to them, whatever it comes into food or whatever it is into financial services or whatever it is in politics and how decisions are made, we enable a society where some centralized organization really holds the key of trust. And to a certain extent, we are now in a world where this trust is not symmetric. So we have to believe some of the things that are told to us. So the only freedom that we have today is to actually choose which institution we choose to believe, rather than access the truth itself. And this is something that has been challenged, and this is something that we believe technology today can solve. The reason why I'm saying this is because fundamentally, from a technical point of view, blockchain is a new computing platform. I see that there are people from different ages in the room. I am 34 and I had the chance to play with a computer when I was 10. I had the chance and privilege to see the first commercial use of internet. So I know, and of course I'm using a smartphone like everyone else in this room. So I've been, lucky enough to witness three computing platforms emerge, right? The personal computer, the internet, and the smartphone. And what is very interesting about those technology is that what defines a computing platform is that it's a new infrastructure that have specific characteristics that previous computing platform didn't have, right? So the PC has the unique ability to perform all the operation that require a massive infrastructure in a very small space. That enable to create, to have computing going into single home. The internet has a set of protocols that enable to exchange information in a specific way. Smartphones has the ability to embed specific sensor into a computing platform that enable specific systems to perform certain tasks that a personal computer or a laptop cannot perform. So if you think about something like a GPS, is not something that you could have in a laptop before, so you couldn't just walk around and hail a taxi, or ordering food, or having all the services that are given today. What we tend to forget though is how ugly those experiences were when this platform emerged. I don't know if you remember the pain that you needed to connect through the internet. it took minutes. Now, on average, if a website doesn't load into 7 seconds, you just go somewhere else. So it's very important to put things in context and understand that computing platform takes time to settle, and the infrastructure and the experience that are required for them to function take a long time. So what is interesting about blockchain in particular is that the specific characteristic of the infrastructure that is embedded into the fabric of blockchain is trust. So it has an inherent set of rules based on cryptography and mathematics that enable you to trust the information that is exchanged into that protocol. And if you think about what I was saying before, in a point in time where we need to redesign what trust is, and now we actually access trusted information, the emergence of such a platform is actually a perfect marriage. However, as I was saying before, we need to overcome some of the challenges that this computing platform have today. So to quote the two camps that were quoted before, you have the enthusiasts, and you have the people that don't really like and think that this is a hype technology. You will probably can find the same type of camps in the previous technologies that I mentioned. So it's just a function of maturity rather than a function of the idea. So an example that one of the things that I want to share with you to reinforce this is I was recently listening to a podcast from Marc Andreessen. So Marc Andreessen, probably famous figure, so he's the inventor of Netscape. So they invented the browser, and the browser was invented because the experience of gathering information online wasn't really good at all. And they have to go through a certain level of problems that they didn't necessarily have to solve, that were necessary to achieve what they wanted to achieve. So not a lot of people in the world knows that things like the cookie were invented by Netscape. And they were invented because the experience of gathering information from the internet was horrendous. SSL certificate, which is a secure way to exchange information, was invented by them because they needed a secure way to exchange information between parties. And it's very interesting because we are witnessing this era in the blockchain space where all these tools are invented today. So we focus a lot on the protocol and the innovation around the protocols and the interoperability, but we spend very little time to try to understand all the tooling required. I was speaking earlier with someone that is in the audience now, and he was saying, how do you use this technology? And it's like, it's getting much better every day. The tooling is getting better. And if the tooling is getting better, it means that more developers will work around, and so on and so forth. So what is interesting about the podcast from Marc Andreessen was that someone asked, what is the original sin of the internet? And what he said was that the original sin of the internet, in his opinion, was the fact that there was no payment embedded into the web. So payment was not necessarily something that you could do. So you couldn't do transaction and exchange value into internet how it was created. You had a parallel set of transactions that were financial transactions, and then you have data transaction. And what he think that what he mentioned is that it's very interesting because then he forced the web to create specific business model that were around data extraction. So the main way to monetize the traffic was to extract as much data as you can, and then creating model around, in particular, advertising that enable you to monetize the content. However, this model that favor extraction rather than value creation have as a consequence the fact that creates larger data sets that then influence, like in a waterfall, all decisions that are made online. And therefore you have scenarios where you have to trust black boxes that you can't really challenge. So we live in this world where consumers and citizens need to challenge and are challenging brands and government, and you use the technologies that is fundamentally that you can challenge. And therefore, what we think is that blockchain will create what we call the worldwide ledger, because it has the potential to reduce that asymmetry. So empowering users to generate value, to exchange value, and to have more access to a fair exchange, where business model can be created towards the value creation, not to the extraction. And that will enable us to have a much more transparent approach wherever we choose to use a specific services or a specific provider. If you think about it, there was an attempt that was similar with the movement of the open source, around open source. But that open source was not necessarily monetized because there was no inherent way to monetize that movement overall. So you ended up folding into more traditional models that were not necessarily leveraging the technology as much as possible. I know this sounds very theoretical, but what I wanted to share is the experience of Everledger and how we use that in the diamond industry. So the diamond industry, as you can imagine, and as you know, is an industry that is based on trust. People trade together since generation. It's mostly a family business industry. And they were experienced a few years ago a massive crisis around trust. It was due to specific hack of certain institution, specific lack of trust between parties, a new reconfiguration of the trade overall. So what Everledger came with was the idea to create a distributed network where different participants in the industry could share trusted data to enable and share the provenance and the authenticity of every single good. That enabled us to connect manufacturer, retailer, and consumer, institution, third-party certification to actually verify that a unique history of every single asset could be created, traded, and exchanged. And that solved the problem for consumers to actually believe only the direct person you were doing business with. Because in most of supply chains, as you know, you can only rely on the information that your supplier or your direct supplier can provide to you. You have no idea around what's happening at the tier 2 or 3. So you actually have to believe your supplier that all the information that is provided to you is correct. What we enabled was to create a way for you to access the information of transactions that happened before and outside your control, so that for the first time you could have a full view of all the provenance of every single asset. And this method this technology was a pivotal part for that, because we need to have the inherent trust embedded into that. Now, what was interesting is that as a result, it's changing the way the industry approach governance, it's changing the way the industry approach sharing, because it's actually the only way to meet the expectation of businesses and consumers today. So what I wanted to leave you with is really three things. Is understanding that blockchain as a technology is fundamental because it's a new computing platform. It looks still pretty ugly, but it's absolutely normal when you compare to the rest. But the fundamental story here is how you can use this technology to rephrase and restructure the way trust is exchanged and verified between individuals, companies, and governments. Thank you very much.